Always choose to talk.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Is that going to be?
Uoči minhenske konferencije o sigurnosti razgovaramo s njezinim prvim čovjekom, Wolfgangom Ischigerom. Neizvjesnost oko američkih poteza vezano za NATO, stav Bijele kuće u Evropskoj uniji, američki odnosi s Rusijom i brojna druga pitanja teme su razgovora. Ischinger govori o propustima zapadne politike kada je u pitanju zapadni Balkan. O tome zašto je zabrinut kada je riječ o sveukupnom stanju u svijetu, iskusni njemački diplomat objašnjava za Al Jazeeru. Mr. Ischinger, welcome to Al Jazeera Balkans. It's time for 53rd Munich Security Conference, but this year is, as it seems, one of the most important conferences in its history. We usually can hear that the world is on some kind of crossroad. What crossroad is that? What path to choose?
The conference this year, in 2017, promises to be one of the more historic ones, more exciting ones, I'm sure. We have had, even before the election of Donald Trump, a huge number of open questions, of question marks about the intentions and the realities of our world. What does Putin want? What's going to happen in Syria? What will happen in the Balkans? Is there peace possible in Ukraine? What about the South China Seas and China's ambitions? What about Yemen? I mean, the list is long, and we had many more questions than answers.
But now there are even more questions.
And we had questions regarding the inner cohesion of the European Union, Brexit, the policies of our EU members, Hungary, Poland. Elections are coming up in the Netherlands, in France, etc. So there are centrifugal forces, huge question marks. Now comes the election of Donald Trump, and even more question marks. And because the United States is such a unique world power, whatever Donald Trump has said in the election campaign, or whatever his administration is now saying or not saying, is of course of huge importance, not only to us here in Europe, but to the rest of the world. I hope very much that this weekend, when we will have the first foreign speech by the Trump administration outside the United States, Vice President Pence will deliver a speech on Saturday, this coming Saturday morning. I hope that some of the question marks can then be erased, and there will be hopefully more clarity than before.
Well, many are interested to be in Munich this year. You'll have more than 500 high-ranking politicians, head of states, top diplomats, military and defense experts, businessmen. What do you expect from this year's gathering? Is it going to give the answers to some of these questions that you mentioned?
Well, you know, first and foremost, let's remember that the Munich Security Conference does not pretend to be a decision-making organ of the international community. This is a private event. I invite, I'm in my capacity as a private citizen, I'm a former member of the German government, but I'm now a private citizen. I get a lot of support from the German government, but it's my decision whom to invite, which subject matters to put on the agenda, etc. So we are an informal event. We don't issue a formal communique. We don't try to reach any formal decisions. But what we can do is, wherever there is an important crisis, where is a conflict, a war, or a conflict looming over the horizon, we can try to create impulses to set in motion a process.
Well, as you already said, it's the first appearance of a new American administration on the international stage. Many are worried about what the Donald Trump era could bring. Do you share those worries?
I am worried because I listen to exactly to what has been said. I am a little less worried now than I was, let's say, 3 weeks ago, because we have heard explanations from senior members of the new administration on a number of issues such as, you know, will the United States remain committed to NATO, for example? The new Secretary of Defense has confirmed that that is the case. So I imagine we can we can regard that issue as settled, hopefully. But there are even more important issues which are not yet settled. My understanding of the way Donald Trump sees Europe is that he is not a protector and supporter of the idea of European integration. He has indicated his desire to negotiate with each and every country individually. That would be a terrible recipe for the process of European integration, which has come under so much pressure recently with our problems with Greek finances, with the euro, with Schengen, with the refugees, with Brexit, etc. So we need support from the United States. We don't need from the United States a policy that will drive the EU further apart. For us in Germany, this is the single most important and also most dangerous issue, because our security and our future depends on a peaceful European construction. We are right in the middle, and we are the big boy surrounded by some smaller boys. So for us, the recipe for peace, stability and well-being and prosperity is the EU.
Well, the question is, I suppose, now how to get Trump's support. I mean, before the conference, you sent a message to European politicians not to be arrogant, not to point fingers on Americans. Is that some kind of cautiousness?
Well, I think I think it is always in foreign policy a bad recipe if you start to teach, you know, with your finger, to preach from the high moral ground, as if we were the good guys and the Americans are the bad guys. Let's take an example. We get all excited about the fact that Donald Trump has announced that he will keep the Mexicans out of the United States. Well, let's be honest. How many European countries have agreed to take large numbers of refugees from the Syrian drama over the last year or two? Germany and a few others, but certainly not all, and many have totally refused to take a single one. So are we the good guys and they the bad guys? Not really.
When Cold War was over, there were a lot of discussion about future of NATO. I already mentioned it. Alliance survived as one of the most important ties between America and Europe, first of all. What now? You have a leader of a leading nation raising some doubts about the alliance. Is the future of NATO certain?
Well, quite frankly, I think it is, because the alternative would not only be terrible for us, it would also not be good for the United States. Look, I mean, for the United States, NATO has been now for several decades an excellent instrument of, you know, leading Europe, leading European partners in all matters of foreign policy and security. If you are a world power, you would hate to give up such an instrument which allows you to be a power in Europe. America as a European power. That happens through NATO, essentially. So I think it's not in the American interest to give that up. And it would be, of course, disastrous for us in Europe, because we have, unfortunately, outsourced important aspects of our security, nuclear protection, to the United States for 50 years now. That is actually not a very healthy situation, and I can understand why many Americans and the Trump administration now with increased urgency are saying to us, look, why should we carry the lion's share of this collective burden, 70% or more? Why do you not contribute more, you European NATO members? That's a fair question.
But is it only a matter of who is going to finance it?
It's not only a question of finance, it's also a matter of strategic vision. But, you know, the most recent declarations from the incoming Trump administration have been more reassuring. And I fully expect that this weekend in Munich, the Trump administration will tell us, don't worry about NATO, we will stick with it.
American relations with Russia are also interesting. What could a possible friendship between Trump and Putin could bring to the world? What's the best and what's worst case scenario from European point of view?
Well, first and foremost, I think the key point is that from a point of view of European policy, from a point of view of the German interest, it is, of course, desirable to have a strategic dialogue between Washington and the Kremlin. So in principle, it is highly desirable that Trump and Putin get together to discuss Ukraine, Syria, Yemen, China, and the whole list of unresolved issues, Iran. The one thing that must not happen, and I hope it will not happen, is that the President of the United States strikes a deal with the President of Russia over the heads of us Europeans. That is what we in Germany call the Rapallo effect, because the Germans in the 1920s had a deal with the then Soviet Union sort of over the heads of our Polish neighbors and others. And that is, of course, a terribly bad idea. So I hope that as President Trump begins to engage with President Putin, that he would honor the correct sequence, consulting with allies first and figuring out what are the key interests of allies that I need to take into account, and then talk to Putin.
Well, but how to avoid that some kind of bad scenario from European point of view? Because we should consider, could it happen that Europe is somehow sidelined, pushed away from international scene by its main political ally?
Well, look, the room of maneuver between Putin and Trump is not so huge. What is the strategic interest of Putin? What is the strategic interest of the United States? If, for example, President Trump suggests to Putin, why don't you give up your alliance with the Iranians? I don't like the Iranians for the following 5 reasons. Why don't we work in a different way? I think that is not going to be a possible way forward for Putin. He has made a strategic decision to honor the Iran agreement and to work with Iran in his way to try to achieve Russian objectives in the region. Conversely, if Putin says to Trump, look, as a first step, why don't you cancel your missile defense program? This makes us unhappy to have missile defense installations in Romania, in Poland, along our border more or less. Why don't you get rid of this stuff? Do you think it will be very easy for Mr. Trump to say, okay, I give it up? He would be accused by his own Republican friends in the Senate of weakening the defense of the United States and allies. So what I'm trying to say is, there is, of course, room for negotiations, and hopefully some meaningful things will come out of it. But, the wonderful brotherly embrace, the kiss of love between Washington and Moscow, I don't see it.
What's the future of European Union? Many believe that some changes are inevitable, but what kind of changes?
Well, let's acknowledge that the European Union is in an almost existential crisis. Let's be honest about it. We have several issues to deal with. There is Brexit, first and foremost. This is the first time an important member decides to leave this union. This is shaking our foundations. It's a difficult issue. It's regrettable, but it's reality. Second, we have not really resolved the financial issues symbolized by Greece and the euro crisis, etc. And third, we have in many member countries of the EU nationalistic populist movements which would love to go back to you know, the exclusive existence of the nation state, and who don't really embrace the idea of integration, of giving up any elements of national sovereignty. So that we are in a crisis. I think that each and every crisis in international relations also offers an opportunity. The European Union, the history of the European Union, which has been a positive history of 50 years, is a history of crisis and opportunity. I was a young diplomat when Maggie Thatcher said, "I want my money back." That was a real crisis. But out of this crisis, with the British in the early 80s, grew a better relationship, a closer union. So I'm an optimist. I think the EU can and will survive this crisis, and maybe it will emerge even more cohesive, more capable of coming up with one voice on important issues, and hopefully also militarily a bit stronger, because that's where we are, of course, particularly weak.
But on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, you have a President Trump, a president which is very supportive of Brexit. He has been even criticizing European Union. He said that the Union is mainly a German interest right now. Is it? How Berlin perceived that message?
Well, I think that particular sentence by Donald Trump demonstrates that he hasn't really studied how the European Union functions. It is correct that in the current situation, the German export business benefits from the way the euro has developed. But we are not interested. Germany has never tried to influence the European Central Bank in terms of you know, cheap money and low interest rates. We are complaining about it. The one country in the EU that is complaining about Mr. Draghi's policies is Germany. So it is not true that we are trying to manipulate the euro as a currency in favor of Germany's interests. We have always respected the total independence of the central bank, and that is a sacrosanct dogma of German policy. It's always been like that. So I think they have not fully understood in Washington how this functions. We will need to give them a few additional briefings about that.
You said that Europe needs to speak with one voice. You even once said that Europe needs to establish some kind of European FBI. Is that possible?
Everything is possible. It takes political will. In the area of domestic homeland security, it's obviously difficult. Most countries have only recently started to cooperate, you know, with their neighbors in police matters. In the past, you know, where your border is, your police stops, and then the next country is responsible. We have now started in a number of areas, trans-border cooperation. It's not good enough. If we want to combat terrorism, major crime, mafia structures in the European Union, as we have open borders within at least within the Schengen space, I think we need to do a lot better. And that is why I believe that the solution to the sense of insecurity which many Europeans are now feeling. They are afraid of crime, they are afraid of terror, they are afraid of mafia, they're afraid of drugs, etc., etc. I think that the solution would be, just like it happened in the 20th century in the United States, the creation of a European-wide police agency that can intervene in Copenhagen just as it can intervene in Rome if it is a matter of very serious crime or terrorism.
So you see security more as an opportunity,
absolutely,
not as a problem.
And I actually believe that that is what our citizens want. Our citizens want to live in a European Union that is safe, domestically secure, terror-free, and respected by the outside world. I don't know any single citizen in my country who would like to live in a country that's being kicked around. And I think that's a normal sense of any citizen. So we want to get some respect, and that is why I think the issue of domestic security and external security is an issue which is actually appealing to the voter. And if there is one area in the European Union where our citizens would actually like to see a little more Europe, not less Europe, it's security.
So we already said that world is changing. When big players are changing their game, there's always a reflection on small ones. What Western Balkan region could expect from everything that is happening right now on the international scene?
You know, I have been thinking for quite a long time that we have not paid enough attention, we in major Western European capitals, including in Brussels, we have not paid enough attention to what's been going on in Skopje, in Sarajevo, in Pristina, in Belgrade. It is good that we are now having a process with Belgrade regarding the future, rapprochement in the European Union. But I am personally really quite unhappy that we have not managed to make investment by our companies, by international companies, by German companies in the region really an attractive proposition. I think it would actually be not such a big challenge. Take a small country like Kosovo, 2 million people. It's a small place. Just a few thousand jobs, maybe in textile or in other simple production capacities. A few thousand jobs would make a big difference in terms of what is the percentage of unemployed young people. So I think we have not done enough to help the economies of these of the countries in the Western Balkans to recover from the ravages of war and conflict and absence of investment. More needs to be done, and we need also to make sure that we accompany these countries, not only Belgrade, which is now, moving, I think, in the right direction. We need to accompany these countries by chaperoning them. We need to be, our leaders should visit places like Sarajevo, or for that matter Banja Luka, much more often, and explain to the leaders and to the population why it is a good idea to remain united and to try to join us in the European Union as one country, and not go down the road of dividing countries again. That's not the road to prosperity and peace.
Could something be done better by regional politicians?
Of course. I am not happy. I think we cannot be happy by the performance that we have seen. There is, in most of these countries, is too much corruption, not enough attention paid to free and fair elections. I am extremely unhappy to follow events, for example, in Skopje. It's a sad series of things that are happening there. And I just hope that in coming years the EU will have fewer problems inside and will therefore have more time and more energy to spend on the neighborhood. And if I think of the neighborhood, I think of two regions: Northern Africa, Maghreb, Tunisia, Libya, etc., Morocco, and Western Balkans.
And one last question. There are many issues open right now in the world. You're a diplomat. There are always some kind of background informations which are not available to the public. Are you worried about the future? Should we all be worried?
I am moderately worried this year, yes, because I think that our political leaders are also only humans, They can deal with only so many issues at one time. We are currently faced with too many crises and conflicts at the same time. It is very difficult for a leader of France, Italy, Germany, Britain, even the United States to come up with meaningful approaches to all of these issues. How to deal with Russia and NATO, what to do about Ukraine, what to do about Yemen and Syria, what to do about the refugees. Can we prevent another civil war or the continuation of civil war in Libya? What about Mali, where we have our military now actively? Can that situation be transformed into, again, a peaceful situation in Mali? Or are we going to have an never-ending civil war? So too many hot issues at the same time. That is why I'm quite worried. And I really think that what we need at this moment is transatlantic harmony. Hopefully we will find back to that. And we also need to get rid of the tensions which have been created by recent behavior of Russia. In the case of Crimea, case of Eastern Ukraine, many of our neighbors in the EU are afraid of Russia because we don't know exactly what the Russian foreign policy wishes to do next year, this year, next year. So we need more certainty, more stability, and more harmony. Big, big issues.
Mr. Ischinger, thank you very much.
Thank you.